Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is John Edwards. I'm the Vice President of AOI this year. Our President, Cindy Gwelly, could not be with us today. She's having a house issue that she needed to take care of, so I'm standing in for her. The minutes, the recap of our last meeting in October was in the November newsletter, the fall newsletter that went out at the beginning of this month. So unless there's some objection to that, we'll accept those as the record. So moved and done. So that's it. A couple of announcements that I'd like to make. Space is still available at AOI's table at the Women's National Democratic Club Holiday Market. It's Friday, December 6th from 6 to 8, and it coincides with the DuPont Art Walk. And we expect here 100-plus people coming through. So it's no cost to come, sell your book, sell your artwork, crafts at the AOI table. So if you're interested, get in touch with us and show up on Friday, December 6th at 6. Want to also make sure that you all are aware of the New Year's brunch that we always have on New Year's Day, January 1st, right here at the Women's National Democratic Club. So there'll be email announcements going out for the New Year's brunch. Hopefully everybody is able to join us. That's always a festive occasion. And also, in connection with the new year, membership renewal season is on us. And you can do that right now online. You can go to the AOI website, and there's ways to pay for membership renewal for 2025 right there online. We will also be sending out postcard reminders of that in a letter, so look out for a letter coming to you in early January and reminders for membership renewal coming up in the new year. A few announcements of note. We wanted to remember that Evelyn Ford, a member, as well as her daughter, is also a member. Evelyn celebrated her 103rd birthday just recently, so happy birthday to Evelyn. And also, Ellie Newman, who is sitting here in front of us, celebrated her 100th birthday with a party right here at the club. So happy birthday. Another announcement that I'd like to make, the Decor Bacon House has an event tonight. Today is the 21st, right? So it's tonight, Thursday night, from 6 to 8:30. It is a panel discussion on the President's Neighborhood, 24 blocks, 2 blockbuster centuries of change. And the panel will feature John DeFerrari, Frank Leone, and organized by Terry Waltz, all AOI members. You can attend in person, which includes a dinner, or you can view online. So check that out. It should be a fantastic panel discussion. Also coming up in early December, the Hyrick House is having a multi-day holiday market. It's actually going to go on for over a week at the Hyrick House, December 6th through 10th, and then 10th through 13th. The market features all local makers, holiday activities, locally brewed beers, decorated house tours, and more. So if you're interested in a fantastic holiday event, in addition to the Women's National Democratic Club's holiday market, you can check out the Hyrick House's holiday market in early December as well. You can go to their website, and they have all of the information to get tickets for the various activities going on at Hyrick. And one other announcement, on December 18th, on Wednesday, here at the Women's National Democratic Club, there is a concert, the Steve Washington Trio, Disney at 100, a festive musical evening. So that is at 6:30 to 7 with a reception and a music program at 7 o'clock. And you can talk to Cliff Teen, who is here, if you are interested in attending that here on December 18th. And at this point, I will hand it over to our treasurer and impromptu membership director, Carolyn Michelle, to talk about new members.
We have 2 new members since our last meeting. Yay! Alexandra Bouzier, is she here today? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am Alex. Please call me Alex. I am a daughter of a native DC resident and a mother to another DC resident.
Welcome. And on the spot, oh, I didn't have to go too far. She's right here. Elizabeth Yearly Grozer joined today.
I have lived in D.C. for 6 years, but a long time ago, and I'm old, so I figured I make the criteria. So there you go.
So I'd like to.
And do we have any guests here that would like to introduce themselves?
Well, first, we need to officially vote them in.
Oh, we need to vote them in, that's true.
Yeah.
Do I hear a motion to vote in our 2 new members?
I move we accept the 2 new members into our...
Motion, a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations, you're members.
Hey, welcome. Hey. And we do have some visitors.
Yes.
Introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is So Angel Childs, and I was invited to the event by Antoinette White Richardson.
Welcome. Annie, I know that there's some visitors over at this table, and then I'll make over this way.
Hi, I'm Sarah Green, and I came
And I know that there are a whole lot of Ruperts here. Ruperts? They're over here. Okay. But first, you're a visitor. He just pointed to you.
Thank you. It's been a long time since I've been here, and it makes me feel at home.
Good. And now, the Ruperts.
Ray Rupert, my wife Wally, and our son Mark, and daughter Christina.
Welcome everyone.
So great. Welcome to our new members and our guests here today. Unfortunately, Nelson is not with us today to do trivia, but in his place, we have business that we need to take care of today. Officially, our annual meeting and elections to our board. And with that, we'll turn the rostrum over to Bill Brown to handle board elections.
Thank you, John. What a great turnout today. It's nice to see a lot of returning people. I'd like a moment of personal privilege and thank John for the excellent job he does with the newsletter. The AOI newsletter, the black and white version is great. The online color version is excellent. So we have John to thank for that. This is going to be the first time, certainly post-COVID, that I've been up here to conduct an election. And I always like to think of our past nominating committee chair lady, Barbara Drexler, who just passed away a few months ago, conducting these elections for, goodness gracious, I don't remember how many years, both at the Pier 7 and at the Capitol Skyline Hotel. So I'm going to try to channel Barbara a little bit in my role up here. First of all, we have 3 board members who continue to serve into next year, and that's Sherry Sewell, Gary Scott, and Kim Bender. So they will not be elected today, okay? So on September 19th, 2024, the nominating committee, now comprised of past officers and directors, recommended the following slate of officers and directors for the 2025-2026 membership year. As I call each nominee's name, please stand and remain standing. I'll read it quickly so that you don't have to stand too long. We know that Cindy is unable to be with us today, but for President, the incumbent Cindy Gwelly. For Vice President, incumbent John Edwards. I know you were standing before, but you have to stand. For Secretary, incumbent Rick Moreno. Rick. For Treasurer, incumbent Carolyn Michelle, who you just heard from. For Historian, our incumbent Nelson Ryman Snyder, who's out in Arizona traveling with his family, and I know wishes he could be here to help declutter his collection as giveaways. But actually, Nelson's collection was accessioned into the Kiplinger Research Library this past week. So his new Columbia archives are now in the safe hands of the DC History Center. Continuing on, and please stand, these are our new folks, and this is kind of interesting. These are for directors. Patricia Tyson and Teresa Saxton. A little bit of background. These two ladies, longtime AOI friends and supporters, are sisters. They represent the Military Road School Preservation Trust, and in a little bit of a turn of things, rather than either of them individually serving as directors, they're serving jointly representing the Military Road School Preservation Trust. So Teresa and Pat, you have to remain standing. Now we have Patricia Clark. Pat, if you would stand. Pat lives up in Glover Park. She's the president of the Glover Park Village, among other things. I'm getting everyone to provide a little bit of a bio that I can have on our website, but Pat has been a longtime supporter and member of AOI. And finally, returning for an encore performance is Juliet Smith, who Juliet served for a number of years as an AOI director and then stepped back. She used to, in her last few years, she's going to be embarrassed that I'm going to mention this, used to coordinate AOI's Business Legends Awards, which AOI in the old days used to give to such unknown entities as Pepco, Washington Gas, the Kiplinger family, Galt Jewelers, Scholl's Cafeteria, and on and on and on. Well, the ones towards the end, through no fault of Juliet's, all went defunct. Galt Jewelers, Scholl's Cafeteria, and some others. So I changed it tongue-in-cheek from the AOI Business Legends Award to the AOI Kiss of Death Award. So Juliet's rejoining the board. And as I said, Gary, Kim, and Sherry will continue to serve. So this is the slate of nominees. What I would like to is have a first and a second to nominate them officially by the group. Do I hear a first? Yes, we have a first. We have a.
I move that we accept the slate as proposed.
Thank you. And I saw a second. Second here. All those. Now, actually, if there are if there's no additional discussion, I would just ask that all those in favor of adopting the slate of officers as first and seconded by acclamation, just please say aye. Aye. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I present your officers and directors for the 2025-2026 year.
If only the national elections could be that quick and efficient, our lives would be much happier. Before introducing our speaker today, I also wanted to note that in February, we are hoping to line up a special speaker, Steve Hammond, who is a docent at Arlington House and has worked for many years with the Syphax family that he is a member of, which is also descended from slaves at Arlington House, as well as George Washington Parke Custis, the owner of Arlington House, and has done a lot of work both at Arlington House and at Mount Vernon. So we're trying to line that up, but that should be a really good special discussion that we have for our February lunch. So keep looking for more announcements of that, and also for our winter newsletter that will have details. So now on for our presentation today. Loretta Neuman, our presenter today, is a lifetime member of the AOI. She spoke to us several years ago about the Civil War defenses of Washington and the Battle of Fort Stevens. She was co-founder of the Alliance to Preserve the Civil War Defenses of Washington and served for 7 years as president of that organization. She remains an active member of the board of directors. Loretta was born and educated in Oklahoma. She came to D.C. in 1967 and has lived here ever since. She's worked in senior positions with the National Park Service and the U.S. House of Representatives. For 10 years, she owned a government relations firm, after which she directed President Clinton's American Heritage Rivers Initiative. She later worked for Representative Mark Udall and then retired from federal service. Loretta has been active in many national and local organizations. She's an active member of the Women's National Democratic Club, where we're meeting today. A resident of Tacoma, D.C., she's co-founder of Historic Tacoma Incorporated, successfully sought designation of the Tacoma Historic District, and lobbied for D.C.'s historic preservation law. She's also co-founder and president of the Tacoma Theater Conservancy, and an active member of the Committee of 100 on the federal city, for which she served on for 6 years, served on the board of the D.C. Preservation League as well. In 2022, gosh, I'm making you much older than you are. Sorry for that. In 2022, Loretta was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by DCPL. This year, she's included in DC Women, the publication of the National Women's Foundation that recognizes women who have lived in and had a profound impact on Washington, D.C. So thank you, Loretta, for speaking today about your late husband, Daniel R. Smith. And with that, I will turn that over to Loretta.
Well, I'm so pleased to be here, and my late husband, Daniel Smith, and to tell you his life story. He was so amazing. He came with me here several times, so he knows, many of you know him, I'm sure, and other reasons. We were active in a lot of groups. So, Walter, I think cutting the light a little bit so that's better to see, and I will work this, I hope, well. But I am here to talk about Dan, my dear late husband. Many of you knew him. He was the last known man to be born to a man born into slavery. His father was born in 1863. He was 70 years old when Dan was born, amazing. And he was, and 70 years when Dan was born in 1932. Dan was 90 when he died in 2022. So slavery was not so long ago, and Dan always made that clear. And when we would see somebody like Mitch McConnell on TV one time saying how, slavery, what was terrible, but it was that's not relevant today. And Dan would just roll his eyes and he said, well, my dad, was, maybe he was just a baby slave, but he was still enslaved. Dan felt the importance of educating about the lives of Black Americans, especially descendants of slaves. That's why he wrote his book. He's a great storyteller, and he used to tell me all these stories, and when he decided he wanted to write his memoirs, he said, but I don't know how to write a book. And I said, oh, but you know how to tell stories. So you just tell, and by that time, and you'll hear a little more about this, but he had been interviewed and written about in many publications, and I said, we can snitch from those and embellish them, and don't worry, we'll make a book out of this. We can put it together. So here are some photos of him, and he spoke at schools because he really felt that children needed to know this heritage. And he became famous. He started with a radio interview by Michelle Martin on NPR in 2009, and the front page of the New York Times in 2013, and that was about, it was the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech, and Dan was there, so they interviewed him. And we thought it was just going to be a small little piece in a article. It was like 30, 40, 50% of the article was about Dan, and then a few other people they mentioned. Then in 2020, there was a nationally syndicated article in the Washington Post, And it was syndicated, so it went all over the country. And it spawned many articles throughout the United States, and not just articles, but TV programs in the U.S. and in other countries. In our neighborhood of Tacoma, we have the man who's the head of for D.C., any rate, for Agence France, which is the equivalent of the AP in Europe. And so he wrote an article about Dan, and then it was in London, it was in France, it was in Italy, it was in Germany, even the Netherlands. They didn't print that one, they didn't have a print in English, so I never have, and they didn't translate it. But anyway, it was very exciting. He became known as the Black Forrest Gump. Not because he was smart, so Forrest Gump was coming to him, but because of the intersections he had with so many important people and events in the United States, and you'll hear about a lot of those. But I feel that the best person to talk about Dan was Dan himself. So here's a short interview with him on CBS Mornings. It was a program in February 2022, and Walter here is going to help me start it because I can't control it from here.
As we continue to observe Black History Month, it's hard to believe there are still people alive today who had a parent born into slavery. Daniel Smith, who's almost 90 years old, is one of the few left. Jan Crawford spoke with him about his incredible story, which reflects the arc of race relations in America from slavery to civil rights activism and the fight to end systemic discrimination. Jan is outside the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington. A great story today, Jan. Good morning.
Good morning, Michelle. It's an inspiring, incredible story. And what's even more incredible, the messages that Daniel Smith heard from his father, a freed slave, a survivor, the strongest of the strong, so similar to what many other children of freed slaves heard from their parents. It's a story history has forgotten.
We are survivors.
Daniel Smith is one of the last living links to America's original sin. Your grandparents were enslaved.
Right.
Your father was born the property of a white man.
Yep.
His father, Abram, was born into bondage in Virginia in the early 1860s. He was 70 when his youngest son, Daniel, was born.
He used to tell these stories.
Stories about the inhumanity their ancestors suffered and survived.
Father said you could hear him screaming and crying at the whipping post. But the interesting thing, my father never allowed you to talk negatively about America.
His father believed, like other freed slaves, in this new America, his young son would be great.
He grabbed me and shook me. He said, "You have nothing to cry about. This is America. We came from the strongest of the strong. We survived the ships."
The ship.
He gave me a signal to be strong and to survive.
And not just survive, but thrive and fight for true freedom.
John Lewis.
You have a lot of memories with him.
Right.
Smith's living room is a testament to his generation's struggle for equality. He was there for Martin Luther King Jr.'s March on Washington.
I want to remember someday
little black boys and black girls
can walk hand in hand
with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Well, I was saying yes, and yes.
Smith followed that dream to Alabama, where he helped lead the fight for voting rights. He witnessed firsthand the terror. Smith remembers the Ku Klux Klan torching his office, and one night while driving, a car full of white men chased him down a dark road.
Then all of a sudden, boom, they hit me, and so I sped up as fast as my car would go, and then they come alongside me, pull over, you black. And I said, no, this black is not pulling over, because if they catch you, you're gone.
That must have been the most terrifying.
I wasn't scared, I was angry. But it stays with you up to 89, you know?
Like you can still feel that
feeling.
Yes,
yeah, right.
Smith went on to a successful career in government and then served as head usher at the National Cathedral, where he led presidents to prayer. An incredible life, inspired by a generation history forgets.
We want to think that happened so long ago.
Author Sana Butler says the children of freed slaves like Smith heard similar messages from their parents.
Mothers and fathers said, we didn't survive for you to be anything other than great.
In her book, Sugar of the Crop, Butler spoke to more than a dozen children of slaves, all of whom now are gone. Instead of anger, they were taught, like Smith, they could do anything.
After the Civil War, blacks truly believed the worst was over.
The worst was over.
The worst was over. So they had this immigrant mentality that we're going to go out and achieve everything that we can.
They didn't anticipate the barriers white America would erect. But their message, like the one from Smith's father, was you are the strongest of the strong.
People always say, it can't be done. You can't do this, you can't do that. I don't believe that. If you tell me that, I'm going to do it.
You hear people say today, but America has made so much progress.
It has.
It
really has. When I voted for Obama, I mean, it was shaking. I couldn't believe I was doing this. A black man? We've made a lot of progress.
But he says not nearly enough.
We cannot continue as a nation with people hating each other. My father, he never hated anyone.
You never saw that from him.
Right. No, never saw it.
What would your message be for the future?
Be kind. We need more kindness. I look back in terms of my crazy life, and I think it all came from my father saying, do good things. Do good things.
Now, Daniel Smith turns 90 next month. He's planning to share his story in a book that he's writing with his wife, Loretta, called Son of a Slave. It's a reminder that that dark chapter in America's history is not that far in the past. Tony?
Yeah, Jan, I was just thinking that people say it's ancient history, but it can't be that ancient when you have the son of a person who was born into bondage. Right. That person thought the future was brighter for his son, and it turns out that was true, but there's a lot of work left to do. Jan, thank you very much for a very skillful piece.
Yeah, skillful.
Yeah, that's okay. Always makes me cry, and I've probably seen that a gazillion times. All right, now I have to work. So, about Dan's father. His name was Abram, or actually called A.B. by Dan, born into slavery in Massey's Mill, which is a hamlet in southwestern Virginia near Lynchburg. People know about, come on, who knows where Massey or Lynchburg down there? Yeah, I know several, okay, that's great. Dan's mother, Clara Wheeler Smith, was born in 1908 in Connecticut. So she was in her early 20s when Dan was born, so there's quite a difference in age. Dan did not know the names of his grandparents. They weren't told these things back then. Until we attended a class or a workshop on genealogy at the National Archives. And there was a woman there who helped us. They have computers that you can access with databases that, are too expensive for us to do from home. And clickety-click, she brought him up. And his grandparents' names were William and Augusta Smith. And again, we both just cried. It was the first he knew. And then later, the county historian, and I worked hard with her to get a lot of this his genealogy, found his possible great-grandparents, Daniel and Elvira Smith. Now, isn't that nice that his great-grandparents is likely named also Daniel? Abram and Clara had 6 children. Here they are in 2003. And this was his sister Marion's 80th birthday. And you'll see in the picture from the left to the right is Jenny, Abe, Marion, Dan, and Henny. And then also, Dan was the second youngest, but the youngest was his sister Margaret, who's over here, and she died of lupus at age 27, but she had gotten married and she had a couple of children, and so that added to his family. Dan also had 2 half-brothers, George and Eddie, from his mother and mother's second marriage after Dan's father died. Dan was born in Winsted, Connecticut on March 11, 1932. It's a town of about 10,000 people. It was then, and it apparently still is, with very few blacks. This photo with his father and with his brother Abe and sister Margaret shows their father dressed as Dan described him, a gentleman. And you can see he has a coat and he has this watch fob, for his watch. Always dressed for church on Sunday. And the middle photo right there is Dan. That was the only one we have of him as a child. And he was called Little Copper. What he did was he wanted to be a cop. And there was a crossing guard, and there was a man, he was in uniform, helping the kids. And he volunteered. He was 5 years old. And so for Christmas, he got the uniform, and down he'd go every morning and do that. So he started young. Dan writes vividly what he overheard his father tell of the horrors of slavery and what the things that had been passed down to his father. His father obviously was a baby slave, so he didn't hear them personally. But Dan heard, and Dan had a phenomenal memory. He remembered everybody. He remembered his first grade teacher's name. Now, I don't remember mine. How many of you remember yours? Wow, I'm impressed. Well, I don't. Dan was 6 years old when his father died of a hit-and-run accident. He was a janitor at the Gilbert Clock Company in Winstead. He earned only $16 a week. Now, remember, this was during the Depression, so the fact he had a job at all is probably okay, but $16 a week. He had no savings, no insurance. The family was left destitute. But Dan's mother was determined to keep the family together. As shown here, they lived in humble places, and there's this church they lived in for a summer. Often no running water, no indoor plumbing, and as Dan often said, no food. He said literally, you would open a cabinet, there's no food. Nevertheless, Dan felt he had a happy childhood. And this photo of him over here, he was 12 years old. It's not in the book because Dan didn't want me to put it in because his shirt collar's frayed. And I said, Dan, they know you're poor. No, he always liked to dress nicely and look good, and you'll see he does. But anyway, it's a cute story. But he had great friends and several male mentors, all white, because remember there weren't many blacks in the town. Dan attended Gilbert School in Winstead, a very fine school, but he was the only black at the time. He worked every day before going to school and then afterwards coming back and working into the evenings for Dr. Raymond Church, and he was a veterinarian. Dan learned medical procedures and how to train dogs. And as you'll see coming soon, Dan loved dogs, and that was a big part of his life. Another white male mentor was James McCade, and that's the second picture over there, Dan's Boy Scout leader. In 1950, Dan was voted by his troop, and he was a troop leader too. They voted him for that. But what's special is that he was voted to attend the second National Boy Scout Jamboree at Valley Forge. The first one had been in 1937, and then World War II got in between. So this was only the second one that was ever held. The speakers included President Truman and General Eisenhower. And I remember there's an amusing story he mentions in his book how he gets there and he has a tent. And he had been camping. That's what he loved to do. And so he dug this felt like it was going to rain, so he dug this little trench around his tent so that the water would stay away from his tent. And sure enough, he was the only dry boy in that whole area. Very clever. And then also below are two of his best friends, Ralph Nader and Alfred Umatz. And, of course, over here, his senior yearbook photo. He was noted for his booming bass for the Glee Club, of which he was elected president, the only black one, and they all loved him. I think his smile helped him a lot with everybody. They liked him a lot. And this photo was taken with Dan and his family and friends after he received the Distinguished Alumni Professional Achievement Award from Gilbert School in 2011. And so I had to include, so you can see his family, his friends, black and white. We weren't the only interracial marriage in the family either, so there were more of us, and then also some of his white friends there. Here we come to the dogs. Dan had a lifelong love of dogs. Besides working for the veterinarian while still in high school, he became one of the lead dog trainers in Litchfield County, which was the county that Winstead was in. And he was also, and this is amazing, the only black trainer at the American Kennel Club's annual dog show at Madison Square Gardens in New York. And he used to tell me, I'm going to tear up on you, so don't bear with me. But he told me a story how, he couldn't understand why he would go there, and everybody would know him. They'd say, hi, Dan, hi, Dan, hi, Dan. And he couldn't remember their names. And then he realized, oh, yeah, he was the only black person there. They would remember him, but he wouldn't remember them. And then after high school, Dan was drafted into the Army and was sent to Korea. And his dear childhood friend, his best friend, whoops, did I skip one? Oh, I think I'm going to have to come back to that. Yeah, I did. I have him out of order. He was here. He's drafted in the Army and sent to Korea. His childhood friend Eddie Kane, down here on the left, he became a hero. I mean, he won the Silver Star. He had all these awards. But they were best friends, and it just devastated Dan all his life. We would go every year on Veterans Day to go to the Korean War Memorial, and we always look up Eddie. They have a director there, and you can find people. It was always there to honor Eddie. But also Dan looked after his mother, Eddie's mother, sent her cards, Christmas flowers, just until she died at the age of 98. I mean, he really looked after that woman. And he said that when they were going into the war, that whoever, somebody died first, they would look after the other. So Eddie had promised to look after Dan's mother, and Dan promised to look after his mother. The Korean War chapter in his memoir shows Dan's leadership and courage. He became a medical technician in the operating room. You can see down there the picture. And then he became a lifeguard in the summer at the base pool. Look at that body on that. And they had leaks in there. It was concrete, and there was some leaks in it, and he needed to repair it in order to use it. And there's a wonderful story in the book about how he managed to get the concrete to build the thing. There was much discrimination there, and here's this black man coming and wanting a ton of concrete. I don't know how much he needed, but lots. And he got it. And he says, this is quoting, Korea really turned me from a boy into a man. And I will say in the book, he tells some of the most humorous, but also some of the saddest stories in the book. It's a good read. Now we got to go back to that other one that was this, oops, come on now. Before the joy of work. And Dan, when we were working on it, he kept saying, I have to have the joy of work in there, the joy of work. And I said, the joy of work. Well, his first job was at the age of 12, and he worked for a garbage man. He was paid 50 cents a week. And he has some amusing story about that. I won't say it now, but you'd have to read it. But then at age 14, he picked Connecticut tobacco. You had to be 14 to be able to do that. And he later learned that Martin Luther King had also picked tobacco in another field nearby. And Martin Luther King later wrote about it in his autobiography, and I want to read a little what is in this book. Yeah. I mean, and in researching all this, this is when I found out about this, and later people in Connecticut knew it, but nobody else had ever heard the story. But when Martin Luther King later said, it says, at a young age, Martin Luther King Jr., because of doing this, had a good introduction to Northern social society. He saw the stark contrast when returning to Atlanta, writing later in his memoir, quote, I could never adjust to the separate waiting rooms, separate eating places, separate restrooms, partly because the separate was always unequal, and partly because the very idea of separation did something to my sense of dignity and self-respect. And I really think that this clearly must have had some impact later in what he did, what Martin Luther King did throughout his life on civil rights. Now, we skip Korea. And then the Winstead flood. Now I do have to change my little thing, stars here. Of 1955. It was a major event, and Dan had a big part in it. He dove into the raging Mad River, which runs along Main Street down Winstead, and saved a man's life. By then, with the song you saw, he was a swimmer, a good swimmer. Dan's words about it are compelling but modest. The man he saved, Joe Hort, had also tried to save someone. There's a subhead about Dan in the Look magazine article by John Hersey, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Over here you see, that was in Look magazine. Dan writes, "I do think Joe Hort was a true hero also. Indeed, there were many heroes that day." So he was very modest. Well, not 100% modest. He had some pride. We all have some pride. Soon after the Winstead flood, Dan faced his worst racist incident. He worked as a trips director for the YMCA's Camp Jewel. Coming home from a camping trip with the students, he stopped into the Barkhamsted Reservoir and helped pull out a girl who was drowning. They laid her on the beach. And then he writes, again, let me get to this. I do have tabbies that help me find these. And this really is gripping. Okay, they took her to shore and laid her in the sand. I felt her pulse on the side of her neck. It was reasonably strong, although I knew she still suffered from water inhaled into her lungs. I started to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and other life-saving methods. A uniformed police officer was standing on the bank with another gentleman whom somebody said was his uncle. Her uncle. Quote, "Hey, you," he hollered as I bent over the girl. "You," he yelled again. "She's dead, already dead." At first I didn't understand. I knew she was still alive. Then I looked up and saw him glaring at me. He was large and burly, wearing a sidearm and a big, broad hat. I believe he was a state trooper. Then it dawned on me what he meant. I was black and she was white. He did not want my lips on hers. I saw his gun, and I knew what could happen. So I got up and returned to the van with our campers. My usually rowdy group was totally silent. It was as if they had been to a funeral. All the way back to Camp Jewel, there was no discussion. They were as shocked as I was. This remains the most racist incident I have ever experienced in my life. To this day, telling the story brings tears to my eyes, and it still does to me too. To think that anyone would rather have someone die than have her white lips touch my black mouth, incomprehensible. Then, after Korea, using the GI Bill and his personal savings, Dan entered Springfield College in Massachusetts. He was 24 years old. He majored in general studies, minored in sociology and psychology, and his big sport was wrestling. There's that great body that he had. And his white best friend, Bill Babcock, was they were housemates, and that was his white girlfriend who helped him. You'll hear about that in a second. He said, although the students were mainly white, Dan was elected student body president. His girlfriend, Diane Hazard, the one over here, was his campaign manager. One slogan was, vote for man, vote for man, gosh, let me just, vote for Dan, the man with a tan. Afterwards, his first professional job was at Norwich State Hospital in Connecticut. He was the only black social worker there. In August 1963, he and a friend drove to Martin Luther King's March on Washington. They were near Dr. King at the Lincoln Memorial and heard his I Have a Dream speech, and you saw that in the CBS film. But he always wanted to be a veterinarian. So Dan left Connecticut for Tuskegee Institute's veterinary school in Alabama. His first encounter with an all-black school and the deeply segregated South. And he tells some amusing stories about the black students. The minute he was in a dorm with some black students, and they would say things like, well, have you ever dated a white woman? Yeah. and he had a car, and they didn't. I mean, these were pretty, for the most part, probably pretty poor people. And Dan had saved his money, and he did have the GI Bill. So Dan helped direct TICEP, which was a summer education program, Tuskegee Institute Summer Education Program, black and white tutoring poor blacks in Alabama. In March 1965, he participated with Martin Luther King in the third Selma to Montgomery March in support of black voting rights. In August 1965, he married Sandy Hawkins, his first wife. They had 2 children, April and Daniel Jr., nicknamed Rob. So there's the wedding photo over here. Mm-hmm. In 1967, Dan left Tuskegee to work for civil rights in Lowndes County, Alabama. And it was probably the most vicious, horrible place in the United States. There were so many lynchings and so many shootings. It was just terrible. He headed a new anti-poverty program funded by the Federal Office of Economic Opportunity, OEO, again, educating blacks and helping them vote. It was a very dangerous time. Dan writes how his office in an old church was burned down. He also recalls his difficult encounters with Stokely Carmichael, and they were kind of back and forth. Stokely wanted to be the leader, and there was Dan was the leader. But interesting, when Dan left, there was a big barbecue for him that for all the people wanted to commemorate him. And Stokely came, and they did barbecue together, so I guess they finally got along. He also describes that harrowing experience, being chased late at night by the KKK night riders, and you saw those pictures, and they were very well done by the CBS. In 1968, Dan left Alabama with his family for a position with OEO in Washington, D.C. The Fair Housing Act had recently become law, but they still faced discrimination buying a house. And there they are in front of their house. And below it is the covenant that was on it that said that not allowed to sell to, Negroes, Armenians, Jews, Hebrews, Persians, Syrians, and Turks. Now, already that was unenforceable. The Supreme Court had ruled that in the late 40s, but nevertheless, that was in his deed. And I know that others have that too. There's been this wonderful study being done of all the areas around here that have that. At OEO, Dan helped to create neighborhood health centers throughout the United States. It was later renamed Community Health Centers. 1,400 of them still operate. 1 in 11 people in the U.S. relies on them for medical care. So he got his experience there setting up these kinds of programs. Dan describes meeting with black leaders of a health center in the Watts community of Los Angeles the day Martin Luther King was assassinated. They suddenly heard the noises of a riot outside. Dan's OEO team was all white, and of course all the people that they were meeting with were black. They were only able to leave hidden in an ambulance, and they pulled the curtains on it and they all got down. Returning to the riots in D.C., he said the city looked like a war zone, and that you can see that picture. And I lived here then too, and I'm sure many of you did too, and I remember that vividly as well. It was a scary, scary time. The main reason Dan wrote his memoir, however, was to tell the story of how he successfully survived discrimination in running a major new federal health program, Area Health Education Centers, AHEC, part of the National Institutes of Health. And you can see from here, what it was to train doctors and other medical physicians, not just physicians, but helpers, physician assistants, all the kind of people, to serve in rural areas or in underserved areas of urban areas. And you can see on this chart over here how it grew, about 0 to way up there in 81, the top there. That's important for you to see because what happened. He was named the first director of it, and he was the only black man running such a major multi-million-dollar NIH program, and he faced acute discrimination. but he set it up masterfully, and AHEC grew throughout the United States. Despite his success, in 1977, Dan faced two new supervisors who tried to demote him. And I mean, take his grade down. It was horrible what it would have done for him and his family. But and for the program itself. But he fought back. He sought and got the help of the Congressional Black Caucus and a major law firm. And you can see it was Wilmer Cutler and Pickering, now Wilmer Hale. It's one of the major ones here. One of the two became, James Robertson later became a federal judge, and they were just both wonderful lawyers. Indeed, Dan's battle with the bureaucracy and how he managed to survive and flourish demonstrates his courage and resilience. And by the way, those programs are still going today. I mean, I don't have the data on it to give you, but it's still a successful program. And it survived even Republicans' funding. So I don't know what's going to happen with Trump, but it did. Oh, and then afterwards, in 1981, Dan left to take a 3-year assignment with Georgetown University School of Medicine. And he loved it. He loved going up to Georgetown, driving up there. It was so beautiful, and he got to do so many interesting things, and he helped set up some programs, and it was just a great time for him. He returned to the federal government to work on various programs, including those involving international health. He became the director of sub-Saharan health programs there, and so everything was like Saudi Arabia and Libya and all these amazing places he worked with. But then he retired in 1994, and in his post-retirement years, Dan became involved in many important activities. I mean, he was never lazy. This is a very active man. His longtime friend, John Walker, was the first black bishop of the Washington National Cathedral, and he's there in that march there. Walker introduced him to South African Bishop Desmond Tutu, so Dan became friends of Tutu. In 1986, at Tutu's personal invitation, Dan attended his installation as the first black Anglican Archbishop of South Africa. And it's in the book. It's fascinating stuff. Dan later became the head usher at the Washington National Cathedral, and you saw in the film how he was escorting President Bush and Laura Bush in the National Cathedral, and that was after the 9/11, and this was the service that was held a few days later. He escorted many other dignitaries, including both Presidents Bush, including the older one, Clinton and Obama. He also became friends with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. And he had a brief part in the West Wing TV episode Two Cathedrals. That was when Martin Sheen's, the President Bartlett's secretary died, and they had the big service there. And Dan helped the film crew do it properly. Yeah. And then also, here's a picture of Dan, and there's Martin Sheen, and that's the one on the far right is Dan's son Rob as an adult. And he's an actor too. In 1995, Daniel directed the Korean War Veterans Association events for the dedication of the Korean War Memorial in D.C. He was very active in that. And then Dan and I were neighbors at that time, or a little later than that, but anyway, in Tacoma, D.C. And in 2002, we met at a party I gave in my backyard for the neighborhood. Wanted to have some music outside, and we were having a big fight over a park nearby people were using really magnified music, and everybody was concerned about it. And I said, well, I don't want to do that, but I do want to have a little bit of music. So I invited all the neighbors around. I thought they can't get mad at me if they're all invited to my party. Anyway, later we became very close. In 2004, we attended the first birthday of his granddaughter, Talani, in South Africa, and you can see that up here. Dan's daughter, April, is married to Andrew Motaung, a native of South Africa, now also a U.S. citizen. He was raised during apartheid, so he tells some incredible stories as well. In 2012, we participated in the wedding of Dan's Hindu Indian friends in New Delhi, and that's over here. And they're still very good friends of mine as well. And then we visited the Taj Mahal and sat on. That was the Princess Diana bench that she sat on. We sat on it too. It's really beautiful. If you can ever go there, it's amazing. And then we got married at the Washington National Cathedral, of course, on October 28th, 2006. Dan was led in his vows by Reverend Eugene Sutton, who later became the first black bishop of Maryland. I think he's retired in the last couple of years. I was led by Donald Spears, then an adjunct leader of the Washington Ethical Society, which I belonged to. And as you can see from the photos, it was a wonderful blending of Episcopal and ethical culture, traditions, and a merging of our diverse families. It was wonderful. Dan and I were both actively involved in Democratic politics, both at the national and local levels. We have a big backyard. I'm sure some of you have been there. I know many of you have. We held several events for our council member and then D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, and that was when she was running in the council. So the pictures I have, she had a huge one right before the last one she had before she became mayor. And none of the pictures are good. I didn't do a good job on those, but anyway, I like this one. And then you can see us up at we went up to, we supported Kerry, we went to the Democratic Convention. That was the only one I've ever been to, and it was fabulous. And then there we are up in New Hampshire for Hillary. And I point out in here that in 2008, Dan chose to support Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary over Barack Obama. He didn't believe a black man could get elected president. Plus, we both knew and admired Senator Clinton. And our most memorable trip was to Berlin, and they do pronounce it Berlin, not Berlin, New Hampshire, in January to campaign for her in the snow, and it was we had a wonderful time. I think I see this later. That summer, when Hillary withdrew from the race, we immediately went to work campaigning for Obama, and were thrilled when he won. We had good seats for his inauguration. And there we are, down you can see there. A good friend of ours had tickets and couldn't go, and she gave them to us. And oh boy, we were right down under it. It was fabulous. We walked the streets in many towns and cities in Virginia, Maryland, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and D.C. Dan's epilogue in his book ends with this photo of him and his friend and hero, late Representative John Lewis, who quoted an old African proverb, "When you pray, move your feet." And I think we have that right now we need to be doing. I had somebody talk about, we need to meet and talk about our we're so disturbed. I said, we don't need to talk about that. We need to talk about what we're going to do, next to get over this and help the rest of the country. The two last quotes from Dan that I want to read to you. And this is from his epilogue. If I can find it here. It's in the back. Wait a minute. I put the ones that I could get, a quote from at the top. Yes. It's called Learning from the Past. I want to conclude with a few more observations and thoughts about racism in America. It brings me to tears that the third decade of the 21st century, the nation seemed to be regressing rather than progressing in the areas of civil rights, just as it did 100 years earlier. Apparently and unfortunately, too many people in our nation still do not agree on eliminating the types of obstacles that I and other Black Americans encounter in our lives and careers. And then he says, many white people resent the term white supremacy and any discussion of the racism that emanates from it. They confuse bigotry, which they may claim to abhor, with systemic racism, an institutional construct that they do not understand. A white person can genuinely have a black friend and still support policies that will harm that black friend's life and opportunities. And then he ends with the words like from his father. Indeed, as I have often said, with so much hate in the world, what we most need is kindness. We cannot continue in this nation hating each other. Although my father was born into slavery, he never hated anyone. He always said, do good things. That is what has guided me throughout my life. So, there's more. And just, I'm going to get Walter over here to help me with this because I can't control this on here. I have some more. I think you'll enjoy this too. Okay. Dan died 2 years ago on October 19th, 2022 at age 90. There were huge staff-written obituaries in the New York Times and the Washington Post, syndicated to newspapers all over the U.S., from Minneapolis, and Dallas, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. People kept sending me clippings. Also, many articles in other countries, again, spawned from Agence France, and special ones in newspapers in Boston, Lynchburg, Virginia, and Waterbury, Connecticut. Plus items in People magazine, National Review, and the Washingtonian magazine. Plus several local and national television programs. So you can get an idea. He got famous there for a while. Dan chose this spot in Congressional Cemetery because of its history. It's the oldest in Washington, D.C. The many famous people who are buried there. I'll give you names of a few, in case you don't know. Civil War photographer Matthew Brady, especially like that one because it's catty corner from where he's buried. And you have statues of President Lincoln and Frederick Douglass there, and that moved him, of course. But also William Thornton, the architect of the Capitol, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, composer John Philip Sousa, author and radio TV reporter Cokie Roberts, and many more. Dan especially loved Congressional, however, because it allows dogs. With some restrictions, but they can run free. Now, the owners have to pay a fee each year. I think, it's a couple $100 to join, but that helps maintain the cemetery, so it's a really good thing. And maybe if I'm wrong on if anybody here does run their dogs there, and if I got that wrong, let me know. It's cuts the grass. Okay. He loved the idea of dogs being with him and kind of running over him. His permanent memorial incorporates a stone dog from our garden, which Dan had given to me. And there it is down there below. Isn't that sweet? I know he would approve. Dan has also been added to the brochure on African Americans buried at Congressional Cemetery, which includes civil rights activist and former D.C. Mayor Marion Barry, Elaine Locke, originator of the Harlem Renaissance, and many other prominent blacks, and a large number of former enslaved African Americans. And here's the map that shows where Dan and others are buried, so I circled where he is. The entrance is right up at that top on the right, to the right. And they have many programs. They have a tour, an African American tour, and I've gone on a couple of them. They like it when I show up because they get Dan's place. These tour guides, though, they just really took a lot. But anyway, the bit. So now I've said one more thing for the. Oops, come on. Oh God, this I am. His funeral, the quality, intelligence, and everything. All the courage. He had courage. Smiling other women. Now. Saved this. A beautiful. It's not here. These were the ones that he wrote. Freedom Sing. This was about Bruce Adolph. His music. These mornings. So we could click on.
When I say it's hard, it's important to show yourself gratitude by investing.
That is not. That's an ad. There he is. This is the singer of the song. He has a wonderful voice, bass.
The
So, to conclude, thank you for that applause, because that's another thing that brings tears to my eyes. But I do want to thank you for coming, and I want special thanks to Cindy and to John and Walter in the back, who's helped me so much in getting this to work. And I'm happy to answer the questions you might have. I am the back. Good job, Loretta. Thank you. And so somebody you'll need the mic because there are people watching. Behind you, Walter, there's somebody.
The woman that the young woman he saved, did she live? You know, in the drowning accident, coming back on.
For all we know, she died. No, she died. We've looked, we researched. In fact, Dan kept, we went to the newspapers back then to see if we could find anything. And our assumption is they wouldn't write about it, of course. They weren't going to brag about somebody dying because, anyway.
I'm very familiar with Lynchburg. I'd like to know how they moved from Lynchburg to Connecticut.
That's a good question. Yeah, his father, and we have had somebody looking in the census record, and then other things, if you can kind of track where he went. It was his father got married in somewhere around in Lynchburg first time, went up to like Iowa or Idaho or something, Iowa I think it was, Pennsylvania, and then he got married. He was married 3 times, so he wasn't just with Dan's mother. And had a couple of children, and Dan, it's in the book, had another relative, there. So, I mean, it's complicated. But anyway, somehow he made it up to Connecticut, right at the border of New York and Connecticut. So, and then his mother was, from Connecticut, and the father was there, and they got to know each other. And there's some, think about it. I mean, the father was a lot older than the mother. And there was, and he was living in an area when I'm reading through the lines of what is in the papers that we found, or that I didn't find, but the historians and the researchers did. And I think there was a little something going on there that they didn't want the family to know. So, or certainly the family didn't want anyone else to know. But still, they loved each other obviously very much, and Dan really felt that strongly that was a good marriage. The second marriage, after the mother remarried after the father died, was horrible, and the man was an alcoholic, and he was wife beater kind of thing. He'd go off and he'd come back, and had 2 sons, and Dan was never close to the 2 sons. We have become very close to the granddaughter of one of those sons, George, I think, and she's lovely, and she understands what the situation was, and so I've gotten to like her very much, and ditto, she likes me too. So, yeah.
I remember when Steve Roberts' daughter came to WNDC to talk about what she had done at Congressional Cemetery. Do other people remember that? To restore it, she was talking about moving things, like getting things right. But now I know somebody else is doing that.
Right. I think they have now there's a more active organization that helps, of volunteers that do that sort of thing that they didn't have back then. Yeah, I think they take very good care of it now. And I really like the people who work there. They've been so good to me. They really have. In fact, I think it would be good. We haven't had a talk. You had one about Oak Hill here, didn't you? I missed that. I was out of town. But it'd be nice to have one about Congressional Cemetery. Yeah, I think so. Anybody else?
So what happened after he graduated from Tuskegee?
he didn't graduate, but he left Tuskegee to go in the civil rights movement. He just felt the pull. He felt guilty that there he was in school when all this that part of Alabama was just horrible. It was just terrible. And he just felt like he wasn't doing his part to help. And so he left and he got involved in the civil rights movement. But he actually was part of it. And at Tuskegee, they had that summer program, and he directed a big portion of that. And I think that really got him into seeing what's possible, how you could educate some of these. They had to be able to read to be able to vote, right? So they were teaching them how to read so they could then vote. And he saw how that worked, and it worked. And very under trying conditions, people were still getting killed who tried to vote, but. Did that answer it? Okay. Well, I'm so happy you all are here, and I love AOI, so this has been a treasure for me to be able to do this. Thank you. Thank you. I like certificates.
With all of our guests, a certificate of appreciation.
Thank you. I would love a picture. I see Bill back there, always takes pictures. Come on now. Come on. My smile won't last very long. Oh, Walter. Hey, come over here.
Okay, you're free. Thank you, Loretta, and thank you for everyone coming out. Hopefully, we will see all of you at our New Year's Day brunch. Do you have one more thing?
Oh, yeah. We do have a few copies of the book in the back, and my friend Sarah is helping me with them. So they're only $20, no tax on them.
Great, thanks everyone, and have a happy Thanksgiving.